Welcome back. Welcome back. It's that time of year. Sekou Smith here in Atlanta. My main man, John Schumann in New Jersey. The Hang Time Podcast. The 2018-2019 season right around the corner. So what better time than now to start with some previews? We're going to kick things off in the Western Conference, our Pacific Division preview, where the reigning two-time champion Golden State Warriors are restocked, reloaded, ready to go. Shu, I guess any conversation about this NBA season has to start with the Warriors, does it not?
Sure, I guess, or unless you want to just believe that they're maybe the least interesting team in the league, you could go with that angle. If you want to just talk about what teams are most interesting or what teams have the biggest discrepancy between their best case scenario and worst case scenario, you could start elsewhere. But if you want to talk about who could win the championship, you start with the discussion of Warriors versus the field or something to that effect.
Like I said, yeah, start with the Warriors. I mean, look, if we're talking most interesting, sure, you could find other teams, but if we're talking about prevailing wisdom and kind of what everybody assumes will be the case, and we've done this the last 5 years, at least the last 4 years, talking about the Warriors being at the head of the class. And I know Joe Lacob took a lot of grief when he said that they were light years ahead of everybody else. But if you look at what they've done, they've been light years ahead of everybody else. And then this summer, DeMarcus Cousins joins for basically a discounted price. Other than that, you don't have any huge additions. Jonas Jerebko, Damian Lee, these guys, a draft pick, and Jacob. I'm not going crazy about that. Boogie is the big addition for this season, along with a core group that returns intact. I mean, we're talking about Steph Curry, Kevin Durant, Draymond, Klay Thompson, all these guys in the primes of their careers. So from my mind, I don't know how we can't go into a season with the Warriors. Not only is it the runaway favorite to win it again, but I don't know who's close to them based on what they've done since we last saw these teams on the floor in the finals to close that gap on the Warriors.
I think
because to me, that's the biggest thing going for them.
And then my answer to that question is the Boston Celtics. I think we don't know how good that team is going to be.
Sure.
And it could be really, really good. And also have the ability to match up with Golden State to a certain degree. I think if we're just talking Warriors,
yes. Yeah.
We talked about discussing sort of, best case and worst case scenarios for every team. And for the Warriors, I think the best case scenario is they get that 16-0. I think they're that good. Mm-hmm. When they're at their best, they're the best offensive team in the league, and they're the best defensive team in the league. They went 15-0 2 years ago and then lost Game 4 in Cleveland. I think 16-0 is a possibility in the postseason. Regular season is going to be mostly meaningless for them, except in regard to a couple things. One, integrating Cousins when he gets back.
Right.
And then two, there are other bigs. There are younger bigs on that roster. They lose Pachulia, McGee, and West.
Right.
Those guys played a lot of minutes in the regular season last year, not as much in the playoffs. But that means there's an opportunity, especially before Cousins comes back, for guys like Jordan Bell, Kevon Looney, even Damian Jones, who's the biggest of that trio. That's what I think we look at, early in the season is those three guys. Which one of those, or which one or two of those guys, sort of takes a step forward and becomes a more reliable rotation piece and gives them some sort of more sort of versatility on their front line.
Yeah, are we in agreement that the only thing that gets in their way internally is injuries? I mean, and they've dealt with them, obviously, in each of the past couple of seasons. They've had a significant injury to one of their key players, if not a couple of their key players, and they found a way to get over that, and to get through that. But is there I can't imagine there's anything else. It's not like these guys are going to wake up and all of a sudden be sick of each other, or their chemistry is going to go bad out of nowhere. This is basically if they stay healthy, they remain the standard bearer in the division, in the league.
And I think we could pose health as an X factor for every single team, and that's
right.
A given, right? So I don't even want to talk about that. I think the one is Iguodala he turns 35 in January. He was able to turn it on in the playoffs last year, but not after dealing with an injury. So I think, his ability to play at the same level, especially in the postseason, I don't think they're going to worry about him too much in the regular season. His minutes will be down in the regular season.
Yeah.
But he's still an important piece for them as, their first wing off the bench, and gives them sort of the the versatility that that has made them so good on both ends of the floor over these last 4 years. You know, he's still an important piece. And if he's at 35, if he's not as good as he was at 34 and 33 and 32, well, that could have an effect on them in the postseason.
Moving on from the Warriors in the Pacific Division, a team to me, Shu, that is going to look nothing like it did last year, really, or the last few years, given all the change they've had and endured. The Los Angeles Clippers, 10th seed last year with a 42-40 record, having, lost Chris Paul, the summer before. Blake Griffin's gone. Now DeAndre Jordan is no longer there. I mean, Austin Rivers gone. This just seems like no team has decided to institute more change on its own than this Clippers team since Chris Paul left. You got Marcin Gortat, Mike Scott, Luke Mbah a Moute. You got some guys who are there now along with these young draft picks in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Jerome Robinson, your jumbo backcourt of the future, I guess, if you're the Clippers. But how do you sort out what it is the Clippers are trying to do when you're building a team around Lou Williams, basically? I mean, he's the fantastic sixth man and a guy who's proven himself to be a capable leading scorer, but that's not how you build a playoff team in this league.
Yeah, it's funny. They've changed so much, and they've lost their three core guys over the last, year and a few months. But I just see, I look at them and I see potential change coming down the line just because they have some of these vets on expiring contracts. You know, Tobias Harris, Gortat, Wesley Johnson, Beverly on expiring contracts. Avery Bradley only has like a $2 million guarantee for the season after this one. They added Mbah a Moute and Mike Scott, but both of those guys are just on 1-year deals.
Right.
So when I look at this team, I just see, at best, maybe they can squeak, they're in the conversation for the 7-8 seed, stay in the, 7, 8, 9, 10 range. Mm-hmm. At worst, they get off to a slow start and they start selling off some of these vets. And, you talked about Lou Williams. I think it's weird to think of him as an X factor, but I think he is. He's 32. He turns 32 in October, so he's not necessarily on a downswing of his career. But last season, he had a career high in minutes per game at 32.8 and a career high in usage rate. So, yeah. I mean, that was, and to play as well as he did, that was a fantastic season. So, I think they're still relying on him to carry that offense a good amount. And so if he just, doesn't necessarily have a terrible season, but if he's just not as good as he was last year, mm-hmm. things can go sort of sideways for this team pretty quickly. And then we see, all right, now do they start prioritizing the young guys, and do they, find a buyer for some one or more of their vets? Are you building around Lou Williams though? I mean, is that sell? No, I don't think so. I mean, long term, no. I mean, he's on a decent contract, so right. I mean, you can and come January, February, there'll be teams that would love to have a Lou Williams on that contract if he's still as effective as last year or just nearly as effective as last year. So, that could be that contract could be one to sell, not necessarily one to keep and build around. If there's an X factor beyond a guy like Lou Williams for this team, is it one of the young guys? Maybe Gilgeous-Alexander becomes a breakout rookie, kind of like what I don't know if Donovan Mitchell's the right person to compare it to, but maybe something like that where he has a breakout season after falling down a little bit in the draft order. I guess. I mean, I honestly don't know enough about him to know if he's ready to play. You know what I mean? Right. And to try to compare him to Donovan, I think Donovan Mitchell, I don't think we realize how special of a rookie Donovan Mitchell was. I mean, I was doing some stats work on him, and we can talk about that when we get to the Northwest preview, but I think it's unfair to compare a rookie guard in this class to him as far as making an impact early on. Yeah. But I guess if one of those rookies comes up and, I mean, before he can make an impact, he's got to find a way to get some playing time with Teodosic, Bradley, Beverly, and Lou Williams there in the backcourt already. So Who knows in that regard? Yeah. Another team right down the hall from the Clippers is going to have all the eyeballs in the world watching them, of course, the Los Angeles Lakers. Huge summer. Getting LeBron would have cast them in this light anyway.
But then everything else they did, adding Michael Beasley and Rajon Rondo and Lance Stevenson and JaVale McGee, I know it's had people scratching their heads since it happened. And the strange thing about the Lakers is for all the energy and the attention and the hype, have you seen any footage at all this summer or over the summer of any of those guys together working out? In an era where players are always putting their workouts on Instagram or whatever social media platform they use, it just dawned on me, I've not seen LeBron with those guys one time, kind of getting their chemistry together and trying to figure out how they fit. I've seen the Rockets posing on the beach like Baywatch. I've seen videos of every guy and their kids even working out, but I've not seen this Lakers bunch gathering as in the offseason. Does that worry you at all that they haven't worked on that prior to training camp?
No, because we don't know what we don't know, right? Like, we don't know what
they've been working out in secret and haven't been putting it on Instagram.
Maybe.
Maybe they put it on Snapchat and it disappeared.
Yeah, but I do have I was writing notes as their X factor is chemistry, basically, and the ability of the other guys to fit around LeBron. We saw last year that it's not easy to come to play with LeBron the first time if you're something other than a catch and shoot guy. Like Rodney Hood had to take the qualifying offer this week on his contract because he had such a rough time with Cleveland at the end of last year and didn't really fit well around LeBron. Jordan Clarkson, the same to a lesser degree. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's about the ability for guys to fit around him, especially Brandon Ingram and Kuzma, I think, are the most important in that regard. Mm-hmm. I'm curious, I just wrote this note, I wrote a note, I was looking at their depth chart, and their centers are JaVale McGee, Zubac, and your guy, Mo Wagner.
Mo Wagner. Get it right. How dare
Wagner.
you? How dare you disrespect Mo Wagner's name like that?
So prominently in my notes here is the question, LeBron at center? Are they going to play? I mean, they have the ability because they have, Ingram. Say you have a lineup with Ingram and Kuzma and LeBron and, KCP or Josh Hart and Ball or Rondo, in the backcourt. I'm curious to see how much he actually plays center, and I think it's a definite possibility with this team. And I think, with this team, the difference between best case and worst case is pretty extreme. I wrote best case scenario, 4th seed, they win a round to the playoffs. Worst case scenario, they don't make the playoffs. Right. And I think it's not, it's not impossible for that to happen.
Well, I'm confused, though, because the center position has been de-emphasized anyway, right? When teams are playing small ball. JaVale started for the Warriors last year, didn't he? In the finals? I'm trying to remember. He started some for them in the finals. So it's not like they don't have a serviceable guy.
No, I'm not saying it's an abs, but even when JaVale started, how many minutes did he play?
Because everybody's, but that's a matchup thing. You're going small, but
I don't think he's going to be on the court for more than 20 minutes a game.
Right.
And then how much are Zubac and Wagner playing? So I don't know. But Beasley could be another small ball center as well. So that's not impossible either. But I think if you want to put their 5 best players on the floor, LeBron's the center.
Yeah, LeBron's the 5. As crazy as it sounds, I could live with that if I'm the Lakers. Not
against the Sixers.
Not for long stretches.
But not against Joel Embiid. But if Draymond Green's playing center for the Warriors, or Jordan Bell is playing center for the Warriors, or Looney is playing center for the Warriors, you're fine.
And it may be an issue for them against certain teams, as you mentioned. They're only going to see the Sixers twice. In terms of the postseason, is there a Western Conference team that it would frighten you to have LeBron, play those minutes at the 5 for the Lakers? Maybe Houston, but
I think so. And then if the Warriors have Cousins, but. I think that could be a matchup advantage for the Lakers. It would definitely be an disadvantage situation if he were to match up against a more traditional center.
Yeah. I could see a number of different scenarios where I could have LeBron or Wagner or one of those other guys, and mix my lineups and not be concerned with it. I think LeBron's more than capable of handling himself. He's shown us that. What is if we're picking one thing that you think could derail this season for the Lakers, outside of the obvious injuries, like we mentioned, it could be an impact situation for any team. What's the one thing that you look at and say, if they don't have this tightened up, it could derail their season?
I think it's just like their backcourt and how it fits with LeBron. I think it's like if Lance Stevenson could be a really poor fit, Rondo could be a really poor fit. Lonzo Ball, not as much. I think we don't talk about his ability to defend as much and rebound. But I think, there just could be hardly anybody on this team that really complements LeBron perfectly as much as some of the Cavs did.
Right.
And Heat players obviously did.
Are we omitting the other kind of X factor in there, and that Luke Walton has to figure out a way to vibe with all these guys? I mean, they had these young guys last year and had a certain tone about what they were trying to do, and now he's got a completely different cast. I think he'll be fine, given his experience, both as a player and as a coach. He's dealt with an eclectic bunch when he was filling in for Steve Kerr with the Warriors. So it's not like he doesn't have experience managing a group of guys like this. But are we almost overlooking how important a role he's going to play in trying to figure out how to sort through this stuff with a LeBron added to the mix, with Rondo, very strong personalities in that locker room?
Not necessarily. I just question the roster itself more than Walton or LeBron's ability to make the most of it.
Right.
I mean, you can only do so much with Lance Stevenson and Michael Beasley and JaVale McGee. That's basically it. I believe in LeBron's ability to turn some of these guys or make some of these guys better, and maybe some of them will have a really good season or relative good season to previous stops. But I just question their ceiling, with... Yeah, like I said, I question the roster construction more than maybe the chemistry internally or what they can do with what they have.
Right.
If that makes any sense.
No, it does. It does. It makes sense. Let's move on in our Pacific Division preview to the Sacramento Kings, a 27-55 team last year. Vince Carter is gone to Atlanta. Garrett Temple's out of there. The two rotation guys that they lost. Their additions, obviously, getting Marvin Bagley with the number 2 pick in the draft, who I think he's got a potential to really be something special down the road if he works at it and grinds the way you want a young guy to. They didn't do the huge, splashy pickups otherwise, Shu. Yogi Ferrell, solid. Bjelica, solid. The Ben McLemore thing was interesting. Him going back.
Run it back.
Yeah, where it didn't work out before in his career. Deontay Davis, maybe not. A guy that sticks around there. You don't know.
That's Harry Giles. He's the other one they're adding, not to the roster, but to the
and he's a part of that core of young guys, Shu, that I'm curious. Really, I'm not expecting much of the Kings, but I do think it bears keeping an eye on their young core group. Bagley, Bogdanovich, De'Aaron Fox, Giles, Buddy Hield, Jackson, all those guys together as a group. Is that where the Kings have to kind of plant their flag for the future, is making sure that young group of guys, you find a way to develop that young core group in order to turn it around at some point?
Yeah, and I don't necessarily think it's about right now developing them as a group, but finding a star within that group. Do you think there's a potential superstar, Nick? And if so, which guy? I don't know enough about Bagley, really. Honestly, I'm looking forward to seeing him play. I don't know enough about him. I think maybe it's not star, but I'm just talking like a guy who will eventually be a top 50 player in the league or a top 30 player in the league. Not necessarily a superstar, 10-time All-Star among the group, but just very useful players on playoff teams. So who among the group is there? Yeah, I think for these last two teams we're going to talk about, it's, best and worst case scenario isn't about wins and losses. It's about development. And with Sacramento, it's not just about the players. It's about them modernizing their offense. I mean, this is a team last year that ranked last in pace and last in the percentage of their shots that came from the restricted area or three-point range, meaning the most efficient shots on the floor. And they had the worst free throw rate. I mean, in free throw rate, I talk about it's basically free throw attempts over field goal attempts. So amount of times you get to the line per shots from the field. The worst free throw rate in NBA history. So this is a team that not only needs to develop its players, but it needs to develop its system so that they're running a more modern offense and that now with a more modern offense, you can actually make the most of the talent. You know, I mean, that's something that we saw in Philadelphia where Brett Brown was running a pretty modern offense from the start, right? Like even when they were terrible, he came in and put a system in place, and 3 or 4 years later, now they have the talent and they can sort of make the most of that talent because they have an efficient running system in place. And I think the same, Brooklyn's been trying to do the same thing the last couple of years too, but they're a step, behind the Sixers, obviously.
Yeah.
Sacramento has got to sort of put a system in place that works for them. But, they've got, they're taking a lot of shots at it with all these young guys. Last year, they were the only team that got more than 50% of its minutes from first and second year players. And they didn't get any older or, this year they didn't add any vets. They got rid of a couple and they're only getting younger. So I'll be interested to play. I love Bogdanovich, a big guard who makes good decisions with the ball. But I think Fox is a key for them because he's the guy that can really cause trouble with how fast he is. It's just a matter of him learning to run an NBA offense.
Right. I'm going to go out on a limb and suggest that Harry Giles could be the guy that emerges from that entire group this year. And we'll see. But just on the little glimpse of him that I've seen healthy, he looks like, to me, the kind of modern day stretch four that has become the rage, in basketball, with his versatility and skill set and size. And I know there was a time when, as a young teenager, where he was considered the number one guy in his class. The injury certainly impacted that, changed his trajectory. But if he's healthy, he could be back on track to being, one of the better players in his group in terms of age. So I'm going to think Giles even ahead of Bagley. Because I think, as you mentioned, we haven't seen enough of Bagley to know for sure what kind of impact he's going to make and what kind of translation his skill set will prove to be at the NBA level. We saw a very limited amount of him at Duke where he was playing in it. And I think Duke is a system shoe that sometimes you don't get to see a true measure of a guy because of the talent he's playing with, because of that concentration of talent. So sometimes a guy looks one way like Jason Tatum where I didn't know he was nearly as dynamic as he was after watching him at Duke as he would be in the NBA. So maybe there's more to Bagley's game than we've seen, and there's certainly more to Harry Giles' game than we've been allowed to see at the NBA level.
Yeah, I mean, I would add to that just the college game in general. I mean, there's just less space on the floor. It's a different game, and so you never know what the additional space, the additional pace or whatever can do for a guy. And I would think the other thing is with Bagley, I mean, it's his rookie year. I'm with let him get his feet wet, figure out what he needs to do, and then you start to really make the judgment the second year after he gets that year in and he gets that summer of work after his first year. Giles didn't play last year, but he was around an NBA team, and he knows, how to prepare for an NBA game. And so, I think we should focus more on him than maybe Bagley this year. Yeah.
Last team in the Pacific Division that we're going to take a look at is the Phoenix Suns. They had the number one pick, drafted DeAndre Ayton with that pick, picked up Michael Bridges and Elie Okobo in the draft, and another guy, George King, who, the guys that are picked in that spot don't always make an impact, don't even always make the roster. The big problem for me with them right now is obviously Devin Booker being injured and missing some time potentially with the broken hand.
They don't have a point guard, too. They're gonna, Devin Booker is going to be, he'll be all right by November or December, I assume.
But they're the worst team in the West, are they not?
They're the worst. Yes, absolutely.
They're gonna hold that down for another season, aren't they?
and like same thing with Sacramento. It's not about wins or losses with this team. It's about a new coach coming in and setting a standard and building a system on both ends of the floor. It's about finding a point guard. Obviously, I don't think they should think about Devin Booker being a point guard. I think that's not a good plan going forward. Mm-hmm. And it's the development of their other young guys. I mean, Ayton obviously get his feet wet, but I think it's a big year for Josh Jackson. And we just talked about him having 1 year in the league and then a summer of work. It's not just about shooting for him. It's also about, playmaking a little bit. They need somebody else to do some things with the ball. I have a couple of stats. Josh Jackson, he shot 28% on catch and shoot threes, which was 201st out of 203 players who shot 100 catch and shoot threes.
So you're saying it was brutal then?
Yes. Yeah. And then he also had the third worst assist to turnover ratio, 0.82, so more turnovers than assists, among the top 50 guys in usage rate. So, I mean, they gave, and especially at the end of the season, they gave him an opportunity to handle the ball and try to make plays. It didn't work out so well. And so I think it's a big year for him and his development more than anybody else on that roster.
Okay. What about a new coach, again, in this situation, Igor Kokoskov, his first season with the Suns? He's been around the league for so long. I cracked up when people were talking about him being an international coach or whatever. And I'm like, he was with the Pistons when they won a championship. Like, he's been around forever, in the NBA. But people have this notion that all he's ever done has been done, done internationally up until this point. Do you think a first-year coach in a situation like this can have an impact with this group? I mean, they do have some veterans. Trevor Ariza, Ryan Anderson, Darrell Arthur. They've got some guys who are seasoned vets that you're going to hope mentor those young guys, but also potentially get some work out of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can have a new coach on a young team like that make an impact to a certain degree, and I think it's just about establishing a culture. I'll bring it up again, like we saw with Brett Brown in Philadelphia, like we've seen in Brooklyn with Kenny Atkinson. Those teams, even though they were bad, in those coaches' first couple of years, played hard and had a culture that, it wasn't, you go into that locker room and know it's a fairly positive atmosphere. We don't talk enough about how Brett Brown went through those years and kept things amazingly positive with that team. Yeah. And I think Kenny Atkinson is sort of doing the same thing in Brooklyn. And so I think if you follow that sort of model, I think, it's important. It's an important year for Kokoskov and Phoenix and just sort of establishing how these guys are going to play for the next 3 to 4 years.
Right. If we have one thing, what's the Schumann stat for the Pacific Division, John?
All right. This is a tougher. This is one of the tougher ones I've ever asked. But all right. Here there are 219 players last year that scored at least 500 points total. Okay. What player of those 219 got the greatest percentage of his points from fast break points? And I'll sort of break it down like this. This player scored 19.6 points per game. 4.7 of those were fast break points. So that's 24%, which was the highest percentage among the 219 guys who scored at least 500 points. So obviously he's a Pacific Division player. We're in the Pacific Division. Yes. 19.6 per game. And almost 5 of them came from fast break points.
Wow.
Tell you he's a forward who does not shoot very well from the outside, and he's on one of the not-so-good teams in the Pacific Division.
T.J. Warren.
Correct. Wow.
You know why? You know how I knew that, though? Huh. You asked us a question on a previous podcast, and T.J. Warren's name came up, and I was like... And I was like, how does T.J. Warren... It was a different
question. It was about, what was that? That was about like mid-range shots or something like that. I think that's,
Yes. And I'm figuring it has to be him. The minute you said he was on a bad team, I knew there weren't many guys who scored like that. But that's interesting. He's another player, though, John. We got a lot of players. If you think about the Pacific Division itself, there's a lot of talent, but a lot of it is unpolished. Still developing guys.
Warren's a guy who could quickly get lost in the shuffle in Phoenix, too. I'm curious about, because they, the Ryan Anderson addition takes minutes away from Warren and, Dragan Bender.
Right.
Those are all 4s, basically.
Yeah.
The Ariza addition takes minutes away from Jackson and Bridges. So, how is this all going to work out? And yet they're still missing a point guard. There's definitely a trade-off that needs to happen with this roster.
Shocking when you think that they had Bledsoe, Dragic. I mean, they were overrun with point guards.
They had too many point guards. Yeah, it just wasn't long ago. They had too many point guards. Yeah.
and now they can't find one. Crazy. The Pacific Division, we've got the very best that the league has to offer in the Golden State Warriors and potentially the very worst in the Phoenix Suns. Going to be a very interesting season for all of those teams. The Los Angeles Lakers and Clippers and the Sacramento Kings being involved as well. Nobody will be able to keep their eyes off of the Lakers. I mean, it's going to be hard to ignore them when they're, going through whatever they go through this season. They're first with LeBron James in purple and gold. We'll be back Monday with an Atlantic Division preview here on the Hang Time Podcast. So in the meantime, make sure you read up on Sean Powell's 30 Teams in 30 Days series on NBA.com. It's running throughout the entire month of September. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Hang Time on Apple Podcasts and Spotify for episodes all season long. My main man, John Schumann in New Jersey. We'll see you right here next time on the Hang Time Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Hang Time Podcast, and be sure to subscribe subscribe on Apple Podcasts for a new episode every Thursday this season. And as always, say Kuna Matata. Tata.